There is a quiet art to the way God unfolds our lives, a patience so deliberate that we often mistake it for absence. We cry out for clarity, for certainty, for love that arrives with a ringing proclamation, yet the divine rarely speaks in such ways. Instead, he moves in subtleties, in the quiet persistence of the ordinary, until what once seemed mundane is suddenly transformed into the very thing we have longed for. We expect love to come as a revelation, sudden and unmistakable, as though the heavens should part and deliver to us the one we were meant to walk with. But the greatest works of God are rarely announced with trumpet blasts. They are written into the fabric of our days so gently that we do not recognize them for what they are until we step back and see the pattern in full. It is a curious thing the way the divine introduces two souls. A moment so seemingly insignificant that we take no notice of it may, in time, become the axis upon which our entire future turns. We meet someone and think little of it, dismissing the encounter as unremarkable. But in doing so, we forget that the most sacred things in life often enter in disguise. Consider how friendships begin, not in grand declarations of allegiance, but in the simple, consistent presence of another, a shared task, a casual conversation, an unassuming kindness, a person who we see without truly seeing, who walks beside us without our recognition of their significance. Only in time, in reflection, does it become clear that the one who stood beside us all along was not merely a passerby, but a fixture, a piece of our story set in place before we understood its meaning. Love, when fashioned by God, is not rushed. It is not a wildfire that burns bright and quickly fades, but a slow-growing tree, its roots deepening long before its full height is seen. What we do not realize in the moment is that this patience is a mercy. For if love were to be revealed all at once, if the weight of its significance were to fall upon us too soon, we might falter beneath it. The slow unfolding allows us to grow into it, to be shaped by it, so that when the realization comes, it does not startle, but affirms what we have, in some quiet part of ourselves, already come to know. This is why so many dismiss the presence of the one they are meant for. They expect recognition at first sight, a spark that announces itself with certainty, and yet God does not always work through sudden certainties. He works through persistence, through the weaving together of lives in ways so gentle that we mistake them for chance. The friend who understands us before we have spoken, the one whose presence does not demand, but simply remains, the quiet comfort that was there long before we noticed its depth. We are often blind to the work of God while we are within it. We look for the spectacular and miss the sacred simplicity of what is right before us. It is in hindsight that we see with clarity that what felt like mere coincidence was design, that what seemed insignificant was in fact the beginning of something profound. And so we must not be too hasty in our judgments, nor too quick to dismiss the people placed in our path. The love that will endure is not always the love that announces itself immediately. Sometimes it is the love that lingers in the background, the one that stands through seasons of change, the one that is revealed not in a single moment, but in the steady accumulation of 1,000 unnoticed ones. For what God builds, he builds to last. And the greatest things he gives are rarely wrapped in the grand, but in the ordinary, waiting to be seen. There is a quiet miracle in the way true companionship forms, so subtle that we rarely perceive it while it is happening. The soul longs for love, but it often misidentifies its arrival, expecting it to come like a storm, a force undeniable and immediate. Yet the deepest loves, the ones woven into the very fabric of our being, do not rush upon us like fire. They come as friendships, steady and unassuming, enduring when all else shifts, remaining when time and distance would have scattered something lesser. We are prone to overlook what does not demand our attention. A friendship, particularly one that is neither volatile nor dramatic, is easily dismissed as ordinary. The mind so trained by fleeting passions and grand gestures, struggles to recognize the extraordinary nature of a presence that simply remains. And yet, what is more divine than endurance? What is more like the nature of true love than something that stands unchanged by circumstance? Many look for love in the sudden intensity of emotion, but what God often provides is something far more enduring, a presence so constant that we do not think to question it. The one who listens without demand, who stands beside us without condition, whose absence we do not notice until we are faced with the weight of what their presence has truly meant. Love is not always recognized at first glance because it does not need to be. It grows not with haste but with certainty, revealing itself only when the heart is ready to understand it. Friendship, when divinely designed, is not a lesser form of love, but its very foundation. It is where love proves itself before it is named. It is where two souls learn one another not in the fleeting light of admiration, but in the steady glow of understanding. The world often mistakes this quiet foundation for something less significant, but there is a reason that the strongest love stories are not those built on passion alone, but those that began in the simple knowing of another, long before love was spoken aloud. It is in the trials of life that this truth becomes most evident. The weight of suffering reveals what admiration alone cannot, the nature of a love that does not flee when hardship comes. There are affections that shine in the light but vanish in the dark. There are words that sound sweet when spoken in ease but fail when they are most needed. And then there are the souls who remain, not out of obligation, not because of what they gain, but because they were always meant to be there. In times of joy, it is easy to overlook such a presence, but trials, by their nature, strip away illusions. They show us who stands with us not for what we provide, but for who we are. And in that standing, love often reveals itself before we have the wisdom to name it. Consider the weight of suffering shared, the quiet understanding of sorrow, the willingness to bear another's burdens without request. It is in these moments that the truest bonds are formed, not in the grand expressions of love, but in the silent sacrifices made without expectation. There is something deeply holy about a soul who endures with another, not because they must, but because leaving was never an option they considered. We do not always realize the significance of such love when we are in it. The friend who listens when words fail, the one who remains steady when the world turns unkind, the presence that does not waver when others grow weary, these are the signs of something deeper, something lasting. Yet, because love does not always declare itself in the way we expect, we may not recognize it until much later, when the trials have passed and we look back to see who was beside us all along. The greatest loves do not always enter our lives with fanfare. They do not always appear as what we have imagined. Instead, they are given to us in ways we least expect, disguised as friendships that never fade, as companions who endure every season, as souls who are bound to us long before we understand the depth of that bond. And so let us not overlook what is steady. Let us not dismiss what does not demand to be seen. For love, when it is true, does not rush to prove itself. It waits, it endures, and it reveals its strength when we need it most. And when we finally see it for what it is, we will know that it was there all along. There is a curious paradox in the way God weaves lives together. We search for love in the bright moments, in the joys that lift the heart, in the passions that burn like fire. And yet the bonds that endure are not forged in laughter alone, nor in the fleeting sweetness of ease. The truest connections, the ones that hold fast against the tides of time, are born in the weight of burdens shed, in sacrifices made without expectation, in the quiet surrender of self for the sake of another. Love that is real, love that is meant, is not merely found in comfort but in trial. It is easy to walk beside another when the road is smooth, to delight in their presence when life demands little. But the heart that will remain is the one that does not retreat when suffering comes. the one who chooses to bear the weight of another's sorrow, not because it is required, but because something deeper than obligation calls them to do so. We are drawn to what is easy. The world teaches us to seek pleasure, to avoid pain, to pursue what serves us rather than what asks something of us. But love, true love, has never been a thing of ease. It is tested not in moments of joy, but in the dark valleys where choice becomes clear, to stand or to leave, to give or to retreat, to love or to serve the self instead. The most sacred bonds in this life are often unnoticed as they form, for they do not announce themselves in the grand language of passion, but in the quiet acts of sacrifice. There is something holy in the presence of one who remains, not because they must, not because there is something to gain, but because leaving was never a thought to entertain. It is in these moments, these trials, that souls recognize one another, not in the shallow waters of pleasure, but in the deep currents of shared burdens. To suffer beside another, to carry what they cannot hold alone, is to know them in a way that no fleeting passion could allow, love that is willing to kneel in the dust, to bleed alongside another, to give itself away without seeking repayment. That is the love that remains when all else fades. But such love, such encounters are not accidents, though they may seem at first like mere circumstance. They are written into our story long before we recognize their significance. There is an illusion that life is a series of coincidences, that we cross paths with others by chance, that love is something stumbled upon rather than divinely placed. But those who have walked long enough in faith come to see the pattern. They look back and recognize what they did not see at first. That what seemed random was never random at all. A conversation spoken at just the right time, a meeting that should not have happened but did, a moment that, had it been missed, would have altered the entire course of one's life. These are the fingerprints of God, the quiet orchestration of a plan far greater than our own. We imagine that love should come with certainty from the start, that we should recognize its significance at first glance. But heaven does not always announce its work. Sometimes what will matter most enters quietly, concealed in the ordinary, disguised as something small. It is only with time, with reflection, that we begin to see the design. The one who offers a word in passing, a kindness with no expectation of return. The presence that lingers when all others have gone. The conversation that seemed like nothing at the time, but would later become the very thing that altered the course of our days. These are not accidents. These are threads in a tapestry woven long before we could see the picture in full. And yet, because love does not always reveal itself in the way we expect, we risk missing it. We look for what dazzles, what ignites like lightning in the sky, but the divine does not always work through storms. More often it is found in the whisper, in the stillness, in the quiet moments that at first seem insignificant. A shared burden, a sacrifice unseen, a meeting that should not have been yet was. These are the markers of a love written into existence long before we understood its meaning. And when we finally see it, when we look back and recognize the weight of what once seemed so small, we will know that it was never chance but purpose, never an accident but a gift. Love rarely enters with the fanfare we expect. We are taught by stories and songs to look for something unmistakable, something that seizes the heart in an instant, a meeting so charged with meaning that all doubt is banished at once. But the truth is far quieter. Love does not often come in lightning flashes or grand pronouncements. More often, it is like the turning of the seasons, gradual and unnoticed, until one day we realize the entire landscape has changed. We imagine love as something we must chase, something rare and fleeting. Yet the greatest loves are not always those that arrive in a rush, but those that remain, subtle, consistent, woven so gently into our days that we fail to grasp their significance. until time has made it impossible to ignore. Consider how the deepest relationships begin, not with grand declarations, but in the simple constancy of another's presence. The friend who lingers when others drift away, the voice that does not rise above the rest but is always there when it is needed. The one who listens not for what they will gain, but because they wish to understand. There is no spectacle in such love, no sudden awakening to its depth. It grows in the unnoticed moments, in the accumulation of shared silences, small kindnesses, and unspoken understandings. What is most familiar is often overlooked. That which does not demand our attention rarely receives it. We are drawn to what is dramatic, to what startles us from our routine, and so we fail to see what is unfolding in the quiet places of our lives. Love, when it is real, does not seek to impress, it seeks only to remain. And that perhaps is why so many fail to recognize it when it stands before them. It is only in hindsight that we begin to understand. Only when time has passed and we look back with clearer eyes do we see what was always there. We remember the conversations that seemed trivial then but now hold weight. We recall the presence that was once merely comfortable and now feels irreplaceable. We realize that love did not arrive in a single moment but was built over many, its foundation laid long before we knew to call it by its name. There is a reason for this slow unveiling. Were love to be revealed all at once, we might not have the wisdom to receive it. The human heart, so prone to error, so quick to chase after what dazzles, would too easily discard what is truly meant if it were presented too soon. And so, love is given to us gently, piece by piece, so that by the time we recognize it, we have already been shaped to hold it. The beauty of this unfolding is that it allows love to be tested before it is declared. Before words are spoken, before vows are made, there is a knowing that forms in the silence, a recognition that this presence, so constant and unwavering, is not something ordinary, that what once seemed like mere companionship is something far greater. By the time we see it for what it has already proven itself, and there is nothing left to question. We are often blind to the hand of God while we are in the midst of his work. We mistake his patience for inaction, his quiet orchestration for mere coincidence. But when we look back, we begin to see the design, that the paths we thought were our own were leading somewhere all along, that the people who remained were not there by accident, that love was not something we found, but something that was being revealed to us in its own time. And so, when love is introduced not in grand gestures, but in steady presence, when it is recognized only in hindsight rather than at first glance, it is not a sign of its weakness, but of its strength. The love that does not rush, that does not demand to be seen, that simply remains. This is the love that endures. And one day, when the fullness of time has made all things clear, we will look back and know that what we once overlooked was in fact the very thing we had been waiting for all along. There is a kind of impatience woven into the fabric of human nature. We long for answers now, for clarity now, for certainty now. We want to see the full design before we have even taken the first steps upon the path. But heaven does not work according to our urgency. The divine design moves with patience, revealing itself only when the time is right, never too soon, never too late. This is perhaps one of the most difficult lessons to accept, that there is a timing beyond our own, a wisdom beyond our sight. We press forward, straining to understand, demanding signs, asking why the road is unclear, and yet, looking back, we often find that what once seemed like delays were not delays at all, but preparations. What felt like silence was not absence, but orchestration. There is something within us that resists this truth. We believe we must be the architects of our own fate, that if we do not force things into place, they may never come to be. But there is a deep, quiet assurance in knowing that what is meant cannot be rushed, that what is written cannot be erased. The divine does not work in hurried desperation. The hand of God does not tremble or falter. It moves with certainty, with purpose, shaping our lives in ways we do not yet understand. And so we find ourselves waiting, waiting for the right door to open, waiting for the right soul to enter our lives, waiting for the moment when all things will make sense. But waiting is not inaction. It is not wasted time. It is the careful preparation of the heart. It is the unseen weaving of events, the aligning of what must be in place before we can receive what is meant for us. If we were given everything we desired the moment we wished for it, we would not have the wisdom to hold it. A child may long for the responsibility of an adult, but what good would it do them if they had not yet grown strong enough to carry the weight of it? So too, we are shaped in the waiting, we are refined in the longing, and when at last the right time comes, we do not simply receive what was meant for us, we are ready for it. But this readiness does not happen in isolation. It happens as we walk through seasons that seem at first to have no direction. The paths that twist and turn, the moments that feel like detours, the roads that seem to lead nowhere, these are not accidents. They are the shaping of the soul, the journey that must be walked before the destination can be reached. And all the while, though we do not always perceive it, we are being led. The hand of God is not always obvious. He does not always send burning bushes or parting seas. More often his guidance is quiet, like the slow turning of the earth, like the tide that comes and goes with perfect precision. It is easy to believe we are wandering alone when we cannot see the hand that directs our steps. But just because we do not see it does not mean it is not there. Think of the moments in life that have shaped you most, the ones that seemed insignificant at the time, the encounters that should have been fleeting but instead altered your course forever. Did you plan them? Could you have foreseen their impact, or were they in fact part of something far greater? Something you did not recognize until later. We imagine that we are in control, that we are the sole authors of our story. But the most meaningful chapters of our lives are rarely written by our own hand. We are guided, even when we resist it. We are led, even when we think we are lost. It is only later, sometimes years later, that we look back and see the design. What once seemed like unanswered prayers, like closed doors, like delays and disappointments now appear as necessary steps in a journey we did not understand at the time. What once felt like wandering now looks like direction. And so we must learn to trust the timing that is not our own. To rest in the knowledge that what is meant for us will come when we are ready, not a moment before, not a moment after. The divine design is patient. It does not rush. It does not force. It waits until the soul is prepared, until the heart has been shaped, until the time is right. And then, without confusion, without hesitation, it unfolds exactly as it was always meant to. And when it does, we will know. Not because we forced it to happen, not because we chased it down, but because we waited, and in the waiting, we were made ready.